Good evening, everyone. We're so happy you've come out, even though it's raining and everything. So, one of the things that's going to happen is that each of you will be influencers. Everything you learn tonight, you have to take and share with at least 10 or 20 people in the neighborhood so that they will be as informed as you're going to be tonight. The reason we're having this meeting is because I'm sure you know that the Halls, our housing authority, received a $30 million grant called the Choice Neighborhoods Grant that is to revitalize the Cleveland Avenue Homes area, as well as, well, let's say the area includes from 25th Street all the way down to 3rd Street in terms of the length, the project length. And in doing that, that means that the East Ward, where I am the City Council representative, as well as the Northeast Ward, which is being represented right now by Ms. Parman, Morticia Parman, who's doing an excellent job. And it's a delight to be at City Hall with us. We just certainly enjoy her every day. So the project is big, so there's all kinds of activities that's occurring and will occur in the Choice neighborhood area. One of the things that has emerged, and it was always on the plan, but there's a different approach, was the former Brown School. Many years, the discussion was to transform that particular area into a senior citizens complex. And the City Council was asked last month to rescind the restriction on the deed to allow the Brown School property to become phase 1 of the Choice Neighborhood Plan and to have a different look. When that got out, of course, in fact, I was surprised that we weren't going to have a senior housing, at least that the plan had changed. And many residents who had bought into having that property transformed to senior housing was very disappointed to hear that that was the plan. So tonight, what we want to do is to actually present to you, the residents, what the plan is and to have your feedback on it. And we won't make a judgment about it, at least Ms. Parman and I won't, until we hear everything. Just like you, we're going to learn about it from the developers and others who have been instrumental in making the Choice Neighborhoods project work. A lot of it has to deal with funding. A lot of it has to deal with design and all of that. So a lot of has happened, and we really want you to know, and we're going to take our lead from you. But again, thank you so much for coming out tonight and observing this opportunity. You're going to get an overview of the plan by the developers. But now I'd like Ms. Councilmember Parman will say a few words.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out. I am Councilmember Morticia Parman. Some of you know me by TT. I represent the Northeast Ward. During the past, when we actually started this project, I was one of many who actually participated in the neighborhood choice with communicating with a lot of the residents over in Cleveland Homes. That's in the Northeast Ward. Just like you all, I'm gonna go ahead and speak my truth, upset in my spirit about the Brown project and trying to figure out what we were gonna actually do with relocating our seniors in the housing developments. So I always ask in any meeting that we're always in that A, you be respectful of yourself and others, and B, that you speak your truth. Whatever that truth is, as long as it's respectful, that you share whatever your concerns or thoughts are so that we can address them accordingly. I'm not making anybody any promises that I have a magic wand that can fix everything right now immediately, but we can definitely look into trying to find solutions and strategies instead of just condemnation and throwing stones at each other. Thank you.
At this time, I'll introduce Kevin Cheshire of the Winston-Salem Housing Authority. But I do want people to understand there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the Housing Authority is and where they take their direction from. The Housing Authority of Winston-Salem is not a department of the city of Winston-Salem. It is a separate nonprofit organization that operates independent from the city. And they get their funding definitely from other sources, not from the city of Winston-Salem. It was established, I'm not sure what year, but it's been here for many, many years. But I just wanted to make clear that they can operate independent of the city in their operations. They have their separate board of directors and they have a staff. They're all paid through their own finances. So I just wanted to make that clear because sometimes people say, oh, it's the city's operation. Well, it is not. They're a separate independent organization. So Mr. Cheshire, Kevin is absolutely our new director, and he has a heart for the people. So I give him my full support, and his leadership is going to be amazing. He's come in at a difficult time, but we have to let people do their thing as they go forward to make this city a better city. So, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Scipio. As she very eloquently put it, this meeting is about the Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant. I am the Executive Director of the Housing Authority. I want to thank Councilmember Scipio and Councilmember Parman for their support throughout the duration of this grant process. I remember prior to Councilmember Parman having a seat on the City Council, she was very active in our community meetings about this time last year when we were going through this planning process. So she and I have been engaging in various different levels regarding this grant. The same with respect to Councilmember Scipio. I remember her sitting down with the designers and the planners, sketching out ideas, talking about particular landmarks in the community. So that's a process that's been ongoing for multiple years. As a matter of fact, my involvement in the grant extends back approximately 4 years. We made several different efforts prior to the most recent one, which was successful, to try to get this $30 million for the purpose of transforming the Cleveland Avenue homes and the surrounding area. And the first 3 iterations were unfortunately unsuccessful. But we had a lot of support, not just from the city council members, the council members who are here today, their predecessors, see Representative Montgomery, the late Mayor Pro Tem Vivian Burke was supportive, and I just want to acknowledge that as we continue to move forward. I want to continue to lift people up who were instrumental in getting us to this point, because this has been a cumulative effort. This was not a mistake, success. This was effort, learn from it, effort, learn from it, effort, learn from it, and we built upon that to reach the point where we are today. So thank you all for the introduction, for the support. I'll try to run through my slide deck, which really intends to put this project in some context. I know that we're here today to talk about some particular concerns, some citing, some phasing, and I'm happy to respond to all of those concerns and questions, and I really want to make sure that we're drilling down on those issues. But I think that various different folks here have had differing degrees of exposure to this project, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm putting it in context for everybody so that we're all somewhat on the same page with respect to where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So that's the primary purpose of the slide deck. There are going to be breakout sessions after this brief presentation. So if you guys don't mind, just hold the questions to the breakout sessions. I think that there will be more time to respond if we handle it that way. And folks have been dedicated to responding to particular questions in particular subject areas. So we'll proceed that way. My good friend Donovan Duncan over here with Urban Strategies, many of you have seen him, met him before. He knows me well enough to know that it's all I can do is stand up here and talk, much less click at the same time. So he's been kind enough to offer to handle that for me. So I think we can roll on to the next one. So this first, and let me take a stop there too, and I apologize. While I'm mentioning Donovan, I do want to put the team in context. So as Councilmember Scipio mentioned, this was a collaborative effort with respect to the city and the Housing Authority coming together as partners in applying for this $30 million grant. We are now co-equal grantees, which is to say we all signed an agreement with HUD acknowledging our responsibility to administer these grant dollars appropriately and pursuant to the terms of the grant agreement. In addition to the city's involvement and the Housing Authority's involvement, we also have a housing development lead, and that entity is McCormick Bear and Salazar out of St. Louis. They do numerous multifamily affordable housing deals across the country, and their capacity was scored in this grant application. I want to mention that because that's important. As I alluded to earlier, we had made several previous attempts at this grant. HUD looks at the folks that are on the team and assesses their ability to implement the grant. And so one of the reasons that we were successful in the most recent iteration is because we had members on the team who had the capacity in HUD's eyes to actually get the job done. McCormick Barron does not have a representative here today solely and exclusively because of the COVID pandemic. They're on a travel ban. Our particular project manager has some underlying health issues, and so she's unable to travel. And so they're not here because they're apathetic or they're indifferent. They're not here simply because of the travel restrictions associated with COVID. Urban Strategies is our people partner, and we're immensely grateful to Donovan and Eva Mosby for being here with us in town. If I could just get the Urban Strategies team to stand, because we've made several hires collectively since the application process. And so the rest of the folks other than Donovan and Eva are here with us in Winston. They're working out of an apartment at Cleveland Avenue Homes. And Donovan, I don't know if you want to say anything or just note that this is the people team. They are handling the capacity building, the case services. They're on the ground. They're facilitating and responding. I think we've got 110 assessments done already out of roughly 220 families that are occupying the 244 units. So I just wanted to note them. Thank you all for being here and let you know who the folks in the room are. Anything else you want to add, Donovan, before?
So I'll just add, good evening, everyone. I will add that, as Kevin said, the team is working very diligently to support families, to make sure that they're stable and thriving around their educational attainment, around economic mobility, around health disparities, and what does that look like in communities similar to and at Cleveland Avenue Homes. And I would note that they have completed 122 assessments of 220 households. That's over 60-something% of families have had some sort of engagement, and the staff has been on board for a couple of weeks. So that's a tremendous job to do. That's a Herculean task to accomplish in 2 to 3 weeks, with some that in efforts that some people takes 2 to 3 months. So they're out in the community engaging with individuals to help drive change and help support their growth.
Thanks for that, Donovan. So that puts the Urban Strategies team in context, the McCormick Barron team in context, which is the housing developer, and then the city of Winston-Salem, in addition to being a partner on the grant, is also the lead on developing the neighborhood. Tasha Logan Ford, Assistant City Manager, has been a key part of the team, as well as Marla Newman, who's here with us this evening. And so the city's role and responsibility, in addition to kind of co-administering this grant, is taking the lead in the neighborhood amenities that are going to be built around and developed around the change in the housing, okay? Last but not least, it is important to note that the public school system is on board as a key education partner. Dr. Hairston was instrumental in her support of our grant activities, and so the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System is our lead partner with respect to the education implementation. So just putting all that in context, from a team standpoint, will now shift over to putting the neighborhood and the grant area in context. As I said, many of you know this, but just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page about the grant area, as Councilmember Scipio noted, we're north to 25th, we're south to 3rd. The border on the west is a little bit zigzagged, but if you run up Patterson, that's more or less the border on the west side running north to south. And then basically we're just shy of hitting that Ashley school site on the eastern side at Jackson. And then it kind of zigzags down into the corner. And I want to speak to that. We included, the way this choice grant is scored, the HUD team doesn't want their money to be the first money into the entire neighborhood. They want to see that there's been some investment from the public sector and the private sector in the larger neighborhood, and then they score that. But what we've made clear throughout, and what City Council, as it was then comprised, made clear when they considered this action, was that the people being served and the housing being redeveloped were at the sites that you see highlighted there. That's the current Cleveland Avenue home site, going into what used to be Burke Village, and then it was New Hope Manor, and it is now Fairview Landing, just north of the Cleveland Avenue home site. There will be some families there that are impacted via this grant, and there will be a few buildings in that development that are impacted by virtue of this grant. And then the second site is the former Brown Elementary School site, as Councilmember Scipio mentioned earlier. So everything else in that neighborhood is intended to improve, or was intended to improve, the application scoring, okay? And then to acknowledge that what we're trying to do is bridge the gaps that were artificially created by sticking 52 through an established neighborhood, and go back and redraw some of those lines and cross some of those barriers and reestablish some of those connections that were artificially separated. So that's the purpose of drawing the area the way that we did. Donovan, I think we're good on that slide. Thank you. This just shows, and we're all familiar with it, right? This is the Cleveland Avenue site map, which is to say that's the current barrier around Cleveland Avenue. Those are some pictures showing kind of mid-century style construction. It's what we all know as public housing. It's barrack style. It's not unique to Winston-Salem. You can go in almost any city and see it. You've got a lot of buildings that do not face streets, so it's a lack of indefensible space. These super blocks, one way in, one way out, not a lot of green space. And so that's what we're trying from a design standpoint to rectify. I think we're good there, Donovan. So this slide gets to housing and community input. This essentially just puts in historical context what we've done with respect to the grant, that we didn't just get with city staff and come up with this grant application and then shoot it out to HUD, right? So in the last year, the implementation team, which is to say those 4 groups that we identified earlier, McCormick, Urban, the city, and the Housing Authority, engaged with residents and the larger community, hosted design charrettes and workshops, including 2 resident listening sessions, 1 community listening session, 5 partner meetings, 1 community open house, 1 resident cookout, and 1 final community presentation and discussion. That all happened pre-grant submission and all informed the grant. So essentially we took the feedback that we received from those community input and listening sessions and then tried to make sure that the grant reflected that as we wrote it for HUD's consideration. Post-award, which is to say after April of this year, we've done the following. We have facilitated 1 resident meeting update and facilitated 1 partner meeting and update. And I will say, given the challenges associated with gathering with respect to COVID, that was difficult to do. We tried to do that virtually and then allow other folks who were not able to attend virtually to provide input. So we are trying to make sure that we continue the engagement process, not just with respect to folks who are on the ground, who are interacting with Cleveland residents directly regarding case management, but also with respect to the larger community, the business community, the faith community, homeowners in the neighborhood, and making sure that that community involvement and engagement and input did not end with the grant submission, but that we continue to take advantage of that momentum and grow that. I think we're good there, Donovan. So this is a slide specifically on the Brown School site. We'll get into a little bit more in the presentation later. But the note there really is that the Brown School site was first presented during that planning session on September 25th of last year, so roughly a year ago, and we presented that as family housing. So that was the first time that the larger community saw the Brown School site not as senior housing, but as family housing. The preliminary architecture, which is to say the design of that senior site, was presented for comment, as well as the location of the site. We initially showed the senior housing not going on the Brown School site, but along 17th Street, which is the road that runs east and west and kind of divides Cleveland Avenue homes from the Fairview Landing site. But we moved that site, that senior site, down to the Central Park area, which we'll look at when we look at the site plan, because there were some ownership constraints. And what I mean by that is there were some land on 17th Street that neither the city nor the housing authority controlled. Consequently, we were not 100% certain we would be able to build the senior building on that site, which is why we moved it down a little bit further south in the current Cleveland Avenue Homes site. I think we're okay there, Donovan. This speaks to phasing, and I apologize, the font here is too small to see, but the site at the south that's highlighted in, I think, red is the Brown School site, right? Now that, if we had this on magnified like 100 times, you would see that that's identified as phase 1, which means that's the first housing that we're going to build. And we'll get into the schedule later, but that's identified as the phase 1 housing under the choice grant. If you move up north, that entire area that's multicolored, I think there's some purple and some yellow and some green, those consist of phase 2, 3, and 4. Phase 2 is the senior phase. So the second phase that would be built out will be the senior phase. It's just west of Cleveland Avenue, and I'm sorry, I need to stay by the mic. I can't walk up there and point it out, but it's just west of Cleveland Avenue, roughly where the management office at Cleveland Avenue Homes currently sits. That's kind of the southern end of that senior building. It's somewhat of a modified L shape, and it's proposed as a 3-story building. Phase 3 is everything surrounding that on the eastern side, and then phase 4 is everything on the western side that's in kind of a purple hue. So that just speaks to kind of the timing and the phasing of the redevelopment of the 2 sites. I think we're okay there, Donovan. So this is kind of the new site plan. Okay, that's fine. That was what it looked like before. What's it going to look like now? So if you look at the northern end with all that green space, that's the gathering place at Fairview Park. Of course, the proposal there is that that's going to be a new school. And so we're keeping that in. And then as you move further down to the south, it's just showing some of the amenities, secure parking. The orange building, which you can see better, it's the same as what was reflected on the previous slide. That's senior housing. And if you'll note, just to the west of that orange building is what we're calling the Central Park or the neighborhood park. So one of the reasons that we located the senior building where we did is because it's a little bit taller, and so there's better vistas having a 3-story building over that green space, over that Central Park. As you move further down the list, it just reflects that there's a management building with a splash pad kind of between that southern point of the senior building and the single-family row homes and townhomes, the family housing just south of that. All right, Donovan. So that's just a drill down. The call out there, which is to say the box on the right side, kind of brings your attention to the design of that senior building, which is what I mentioned: brick facade, 3-story, modified L, and then the map just puts that in context where the actual senior building will be. So again, I'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation, but I do want to make it clear we're not losing the senior building. And I probably should pause here and note that we as a team, a local team, advocated strongly to keep the senior building in. And I'm not saying that to pat ourselves on the back. I don't know how the room feels about the senior building. I'm just being clear that HUD's primary objective is to make sure that there is replacement housing for the families that are currently living in Cleveland Avenue homes. I think that's excellent. It should be their objective. It should be my objective. It should be Donovan's objective. It should be everybody's objective. Make sure the families that are being displaced have sufficient housing to return to the rehab housing, right? That's what we're all trying to do. HUD wants to make sure then, since the Cleveland Avenue home site is family housing, that we don't go in too early with senior housing that is costly to build and may not actually reflect the needs and the desires of the current Cleveland Avenue homes residents. I think that's a fair criticism. The point that we made back to HUD was that senior affordable housing is a need in the community. We collectively, as a housing authority and as a city, had committed to the community that there would be senior housing in this neighborhood, and we did not want to lose that. So we fought for the senior housing, and we got it. It's located in a different place than we all originally thought it was going to be located, and we can get into the whys of that later. But there is still senior housing, and that was a battle that we did have to fight with HUD to get that approved. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're not losing senior housing, and there's a reason for that. So this describes some of the design of the senior phase. You all can read through it. I will walk us through it. There is a landscape buffer between the family housing and the senior housing, so you don't have a family unit abutting the senior structure. There are parking lots for seniors and families divided with tree-lined islands. The landscaping includes a variety of shrubs, large canopy trees, and lawn space, walking distance and proximity to site amenities such as parks, recreational facilities, and the neighborhood center were one key driver in locating the senior site where we did. The sensitivity of the 3-story buildings facing existing single-family homes. And I'll stop there to say what that bullet point is getting at is when you look at the Brown School site, and you all know there are owner-occupied single-family detached housing units near that Brown School site, right? And so there was some concern that the design aesthetic of having somewhat of an institutional looking building, this relatively tall brick facade senior building in a modified L shape, would not fit in as well with the design aesthetic of the neighborhood as the detached row homes and the family style houses, which we will look at a little bit later on. The last bullet point there simply reflects the fact that the seniors are going to remain as part of the larger community, not segregated out, not isolated, but very much as a part, very much a part of the new redesigned, redeveloped neighborhood. And again, I'm not saying agree with all these things. I'm just wanting to make sure before we have our breakout discussions that we're all on the same page about what led to the decisions, and then we can talk about it. I think we're okay there, Donovan. This just shows unit mix by bedroom size. Key thing to note there, we're talking about 406 units. There are currently 244 apartments in Cleveland Avenue Homes and obviously 0 on the Brown School site. So we're talking about building a total of 406. The bedroom sizes reflect needs based on who's currently occupying the Cleveland Avenue Homes apartments. And so when you look at the 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom, that's not me or anybody else kind of sticking our finger in the air and saying, well, that looks good or that fits with our budget. That's based on making sure that we have sufficient bedroom sizes to meet the needs of the families who are currently living in the site that's being demolished. So that's why that's getting built back the way that it is. That, again, correlates with what we've talked about earlier with respect to the phasing, right? Phase 1 is the Brown School site. That's going to be family housing. Phase 2 is the senior site. That's going to be the 3-story brick building that we talked about. Phase 3 will be more family housing, the same design aesthetic as Phase 1. And Phase 4 is additional family housing, the same design aesthetic as Phase 3 and Phase 1, which we'll show some examples of later in the presentation. I think we're good there, Donovan. Yeah, so this is a good point, and I don't know, some of this stuff gets a little bit down into the weeds, and I don't know how helpful it is to see it, but I thought it was worth putting here, okay? So this is showing, if you look at I guess there are 4 columns, and I apologize, my eyes are terrible, but the PBV replacement, which is that first column, and you get in Phase 1, 39 apartments, Phase 2, 66, Phase 3, 40, and Phase 4, 54, for a total count of 199 units and 49% of the total. So what that means is those apartments there, that 199, those are targeted for people who are at the income levels of residents who are currently living at Cleveland Avenue Homes. That's why we call those replacement units. But our entire objective in this process is to build truly integrated mixed income housing, right? What we've learned historically is that it doesn't work to take folks from deeply subsidized housing, just tear down the old stuff and build the new stuff and not build any additional capacity in the people or in the neighborhood and put the same thing right back and expect a different outcome. So the primary driver of all of our efforts are to allow multiple different income levels, not by getting rid of the people who are not earning at a higher income level, but by bringing people who are earning at a higher income level into the neighborhood and by building capacity in the people who are currently in the neighborhood so that their earnings increase. And we've seen that historically in other choice grants. So the point there is simply if you look at the Brown School site, you have 39 replacement units, 17 at a slightly higher income level, and then 23 at any income level. So from 60% of the area median income all the way up to, $2 million a year like Donovan makes, he could live there. So the phase 2 site is the senior site. It reflects the same thing, right? Point being there that none of these phases are showing purely deeply subsidized units, all replacement units. There are a mix of incomes at every single phase. I think I'm okay there, Donovan, thank you. So this gets to what I was talking about earlier with respect to the building style. The new house, the bullets there reflect that the new housing, and these photos are all of senior buildings that were built in other cities that got choice implementation grants that our development partner was a part of. So these are just examples. It's not to say that what we build here will look exactly like that, but it'll give you a little bit of a flavor for what the design aesthetic will look like. It is, I think, important to note that just like the grant writing process, the design process will be very heavily reliant on the community. So we're not going to just hire an architect and go draw something that you like and that we like, but we're going to bring those design concepts back to the community. We're going to solicit input. So while that's generally speaking what a senior building will look like, it's going to be driven heavily by what folks in this room and others have to say about the design, okay? And I do think it's worth noting there, you'll see that can be somewhat overbearing if it was abutted right up against some of the single-family detached owner-occupied houses that are in proximity to that Brown School site. So that, again, not saying it was right or wrong, just explaining that was some of the thinking when we made the decision to move it from the original site location. Yeah, I think we're good there. Now this to me is more informative. I think by and large most of us have seen kind of a senior building with the brick facade, with the elevators, like we got it, right? Some of them are better, some of them are worse, but we generally understand that. I really love the housing, specifically the housing that is what's built into our design plan, townhome style, row homes. These are replacement units. So, when folks are thinking, gosh, Cleveland Avenue Homes 2.0 is now going to go across the street from Shiloh Baptist Church. No, that's not it, okay? This is the design. Green space, defensible space. It's going to fit in with the design aesthetic of the community. It's going to look very similar to a home, a single-family detached home that's occupied by the homeowner. It's going to be a part of the streetscape. It's going to blend. So it's not going to be barrack-style, concentrated, low-income housing. It's going to be a much different design aesthetic and a much different design approach. So that's why that's up there. And that's not to downplay the extent of community involvement with respect to that design component. That will also be a part. But I do think that the model of mixed income housing that doesn't look like traditional subsidized housing is important to highlight, because that's what our team, which is to say Donovan's group and McCormick, have been successful doing in other areas of the country, and it blends. I think we're okay there, Donovan. Yes, okay. So this is where we get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes about what Councilmember Scipio was alluding to earlier, right? This is where we start talking about the analysis, some of the feedback that we've gotten from the community over the course of the past couple of months, where it seemed like folks were saying, wait a minute, we thought Brown School was going to be a senior building, now we're hearing it's not a senior building. What happened? So this is the first slide that kind of says, all right, we've given this some context with respect to the project and the grant. Now let's drill down a little bit on what some folks see as a potential issue, and let's talk about that and let's hit on those. I do want to mention this because it's not on a slide. I've been at the Housing Authority throughout all the iterations of the acquisition of the Brown School site from Shiloh Baptist Church, the discussions around that. I was not leading that charge at the time, but I was aware of those conversations. And I understand there were representations made and there were expectations, and I get that. We tried. When I say we, I mean the Housing Authority, with support from many people who are in this room, to make that a senior building, okay? And we failed. I mean, there's no other way to say it. When we acquired this site, we were determined to make that a standalone senior building on the Brown School site. It was all we wanted to do with it. We tried 3 different times and were unsuccessful and spent a lot of money trying to make it so. And I don't say that to say, wow, I deserve a standing ovation. It wasn't my money. It wasn't even my effort. I was a part of it, but I was not leading it. But we get $0 for developing new sites. We don't get any funding for building housing. We get money for operating housing. So we tried our best in acquiring this site, petitioning for 9% low-income housing tax credits, evaluating the potential of doing a 4% deal with some bond money. The 9% applications were unsuccessful 3 times. And none of the other financing tools penciled out, which meant that we could not make it work financially. We did not have the money to build this without 9% low-income housing tax credits. We tried 3 times, and we were unsuccessful 3 times. So I don't want it to be perceived as if it were a bait and switch, that this were always the plan. We tried and we tried and we tried, and it didn't work on that site for what was initially proposed for the housing plan there. So getting into some of these other bullets, the first one just notes that a critical factor for HUD awarding Winston-Salem the C&I opportunity, which is the Choice Grant, that's an acronym for the Choice Grant, was because the first phase of the transformation plan would house families and that it would not require any relocation. HUD was not in favor of a first phase of senior housing. So, all right, let's unpack that a little bit. HUD drives this thing, right? It's their $30 million. They want it to be community-led. We want it to be community-led. HUD can't come in here and micromanage it, so they establish and want us to establish a team, which we have done. But at the end of the day, it's HUD's $30 million, and they've seen this done in other places across the country. They know what works and they know what doesn't work. So if they tell us, hey, it's a bad idea to go in first with the senior phase, then we have to listen. So what that's getting at is that when HUD came to town to evaluate our application, they really liked the fact that we could build first. Well, what does that mean? It means we had land that's currently not housing anyone, and we do not have to relocate anyone to start breaking ground and building new housing. So the current residents at Cleveland Avenue Apartments can stay there while we build replacement housing. So that's great, right? It also reduces the number of moves that people have to make off of the site. So instead of me going out and giving people at Cleveland vouchers, they've got to move across town, they've got to find a place, they stay put, and then when that family phase at Brown School is built, significant number can go ahead and move into the new housing at Brown School. They don't have to move again. It also enables us to phase the construction at the Cleveland Avenue home site so that folks who are there can continue to stay there longer without having to be displaced. I don't know if I think the number's somewhere else. There it is, that second bullet point. One of the main goals of the project is to facilitate as many single moves as possible. Okay, we've talked about that. Phase 1 of the transformation for families allows more than 82% of current Cleveland Avenue families the potential to be rehoused in one single move. So without having to move off and then move back, or move twice and then move back. The third bullet indicates the senior building will include amenities for the seniors and separately the community management building space for the entire development. The senior phase will overlook the beautiful Central Park, which I think we've seen that before. That was part of our analysis in determining where that goes. The last bullet indicates that the Brown School site allows larger units to accommodate families, and the site is more conducive to smaller townhome and garter-style buildings than a larger, more imposing senior structure. Now look, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not an architect, I'm not an urban planner, so I was not smart enough to come up with that analysis. What I did do was listen to the folks that do this all over the place, and they said, look guys, this Brown School site's large, and we think if we stick a senior building there, you're gonna have a lot of dead space that we're gonna have to figure out something to do with. If you use it for family units, you can accommodate larger units on the larger space, and you can get more units there. It's a more effective use of the land that you have at your disposal. Again, not here to say right, wrong. I'm here to get feedback, but I'm just trying to paint the picture for what led to this, that it wasn't any sort of nefarious intent. There were some analysis that went into it, agree or disagree, this is what it was. I think we're okay there, Donovan. This just emphasizes what we've already talked about, that the site is mixed income. 58% of the Brown School site would be non-public housing. So that's to say over half of what you're getting at the Brown School site is not going to be public housing. It's going to be something other than replacement housing, higher income levels, part of that mixed income strategy. 24% of the units are going to be set aside as market rate units. that just gets at what I was mentioning earlier, right? So you're going to have almost a quarter of the families who are living at the Brown School site making whatever amount of money. It's not tied to an income level. It's not, the rent is not based on income. It's going to be a quarter of the families there who are at market rate. 35 of the units are workforce. That simply says that you're catching the folks in between. So you've got some replacement units that are heavily subsidized for folks at lower incomes. You've got significant number, 25% at market rate. There is no income restriction. And then you've got workforce units kind of in the middle with some lighter subsidy. The last bullet I think is relatively self-explanatory. The unit mix allows for people that want to live there and willingly choose to do so, taking pride in the community they're part of and holding it to a high standard. That's just the new model. That's what we're all trying to do as housing practitioners, is develop mixed income housing for that reason and others. I think we're okay there, Donovan. Wow, I can't read that at all, so I'm sure those of you in the back definitely can't. I'll run through it because it's not all that important to our discussion today. It basically just lays out the schedule. The first line just indicates that the grant was awarded in April of this year. We're going to go through an architect selection process. We're going to do an environmental analysis of the sites. We're going to enter into a master development agreement with our development partner, McCormick Barron, whom we mentioned. We're going to hire an MWBE Section 3 consultant. We're really trying to make sure we have some communication between the folks that are working on this development and folks who are in the community, MBEs, local labor, local contractors, and we think that we need some technical assistance to help us do that. So that is going to take place, really is taking place now, as a matter of fact. The key thing there with respect to kind of the big deadlines that are driving this development is that the preliminary application is going to be submitted in January. And what that means is, even though we've got $30 million in choice money from HUD, we're going to be building approximately $100 million in new housing. So sometimes you think, okay, we'll take our $30 million and we'll go build $30 million worth of housing. That's not how this works. Just like any of us, when I go buy a house, I have some equity that I put down and then I borrow the rest. That's what we're doing. So we're taking our $30 million, we're borrowing some money from the bank, we're submitting another 9% low-income housing tax credit deal, this time with support from the State Housing Finance Agency, which is responsible for drafting the documents that go into the scoring. And so we're going to finance it with a combination of funds: low-income housing tax credits, money that we've borrowed from the bank, and equity, which is to say cash, from this Choice Neighborhood grant. So that low-income housing tax credit application will initially be submitted in January of 2021. So what are we, 4 months roughly away from that? Presuming that is awarded, it will be awarded in the third or fourth quarter of 2021, which means that construction is likely to start in the fourth quarter of 2021 or the first quarter of 2022. So the takeaway there really is you're not going to see construction even at Brown School until late next calendar year or early the calendar year after that. Now, once it starts, we're going to be on a cycle where basically every year we're submitting, and we're going to be moving then from Brown School to Cleveland Avenue Homes, and then moving into the western side of Cleveland Avenue Homes. But I just want to make sure that we're being clear with respect to scheduling, so that if folks don't see dump trucks and graders riding up and down Highland and Cleveland, you think that something's gone awry with the grant. That's not the case. This is the schedule. It's a roughly 6-year build-out period, so everything's going according to schedule. We've just got to follow the money, and the money's in the 9% low-income housing tax credit funds. Lisa, I'll just mention this before we jump off of this slide. The start of lease-up is noted there as January 2023. So we're a little over 2 years from actually moving people into the new apartments. And I've got a slide on relocation, so that doesn't mean that every family that's currently in Cleveland is going to stay in Cleveland until January 2023. I've got a relocation schedule that we'll get to in just a sec. I think we're good. Hey, there it is. So, man, that's bad too. I'm sorry. So this is a relocation schedule, and I tell you what. I can't even read that. So I'm going to read through it just so we all are looking at the same thing. That first column is 2020. There's nothing on there for relocation. The second column is 2021. The item noted there is demolition of the currently existing Brown School structures. We know those were burned. There is still some residual structure there. We're going to have to demolish that. 2022, relocation begins from Phase 2 and Phase 3. Keeping in mind, Phase 1 is the Brown School site. No one's being relocated off of the Brown School site. So in 2022, we're going to start for the first time moving families off of Cleveland Avenue homes, the Phase 2 and the Phase 3 sites, which are the eastern portions of the Cleveland Avenue home site, into alternative housing. 2023 is the next column over. Relocation continues from Phase 2 and Phase 3 and starts from Phase 4. 2024, 66 replacement senior units will be placed in service, and then we will relocate the residual of the Cleveland Avenue home site. 2025, 40 replacement units placed in service. 2026, 50 replacement units placed in service. Next slide, please, Donovan. This is one, I know there's not a lot of content on this slide, but I did want to note, and I've alluded to it earlier in the presentation, we're staffed up, and we're continuing to staff up. There are individuals on the ground from the community who know the community, who care about the community, who are engaging with the community, who are trying to build capacity in the community, who are making sure that opportunities are made available to the community, and those opportunities are put at the forefront of all of our efforts. Everything that we've done has been with the hope and the expectation that this is not being done for residents or to residents, but with residents. And I think if you talk to some of the folks in the room, you will understand and agree that they all feel the same way. So I just wanted to mention before we close that this is not just about housing. It's not even primarily about housing. It's not just about neighborhood amenities, splash pads, streetscape improvements, revolving lines of credit for neighborhood businesses. It's about all of those things. It's about green spaces and walkways and bike lanes and all of those things. But really it's about building capacity in the community and developing people and preparing people for the opportunities that are going to be before them as a consequence of this choice neighborhood effort, and preparing them to move into the redeveloped housing. So that second bullet just indicates the counseling and support services that are available by virtue of this grant. I think that's all I've got with respect to the housing content. I think we're through, right? So I'm sorry, let me check my schedule. I think now is breakout. Or Donovan, are you going to give some remarks before we go to the breakout? We're okay, we're ready for the breakout. I don't see Marla. I'm not sure if there's a designated, is one circle? Okay. Yeah, so Donovan's saying, sounds like the plan was housing for this circle here, and then people and planning and anything we'll do it that way. Anything that's not the built environment, so anything not housing related is kind of going to be on that side of the room where that easel is with the pad, and anything housing related is going to be over here on this side of the room. Marla, did I mention, I know you're kind of quarterbacking this whole thing. Are there any logistics that I omitted? We're getting ready to go to breakout. Housing here, non-housing here. It's going to be manned, so to speak, by folks that can respond to the questions in the respective subject areas, right? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Donovan just reminded me, and forgive me, I should have mentioned that. This presentation will be posted on the CNI website, which is clevelandavtransformation.com, okay? So it'll be on there.
Can we have the first group to come with their questions and concerns that were expressed? What was yours? We really need to continue right now, so we're going to ask housing, since they're already here, to come and express the questions and concerns that were discussed and resolutions, if any. Who? Okay, now we're going to switch and we're going to talk about people because they're ready.
Good afternoon. We were on the People's team, and one of the questions was, will there be a library? Because at some point it was said that we will have a library, and the resolution is the library is a county function. So there was not a library in our plan. The second was, when will service begin? And so because we talked about the families having education component, the workforce component, and we shared, that's what our staff is on site now. They're doing the assessments. They're actually working with the families to determine their needs. We have 122 families we've done what we call an intake on, and now we dig in deeper with a deep intake assessment to find out what those needs are and those services. We have about 30 partners here in Winston-Salem that we're connecting with. We do not provide all the services. That's why we have partners. We have health partners, educational partners, workforce partners to really help us implement the plan. And the last one was the community wants to be deeply involved when we have meetings. They said, can we walk from door to door in the neighborhood sharing with the homeowners about the meetings that we're having so they can be really thoroughly invested in what's going on in the community? Yes. Okay, thank you. Housing?
Good evening again. So one of the questions that came up was around displacement. When we looked at the number of units from 244 original units being at the Cleveland site, with the site plan that said there was going to be 199 units, what happened to the 45 units? And we talked about how we have worked with other developers within the downtown region and other regions to replace those units in market rate projects, because that's what residents from Cleveland Avenue Homes asked for.
So the second is, how really are residents involved in the decision making?
How really are residents involved in the decision making? And we stated that we wanted to have a transparent process. Residents have been involved. We have a website. We will continue to meet. This process, this is not today's edict and we go away, in 7 years we come back and everyone celebrates. Through this process, we will have many community meetings so everyone can know what's going on. When are you building senior housing? The senior housing we're built in phase 2. So we plan to start after phase 1 is done, when Kevin gave you that timeline, and immediately following that closing, we'll start on phase 2, which would be the senior housing. So late 2023. Will residents have first choice? Yes, public housing residents will have first choice to come back. But again, we talked a lot about what options do public housing residents want. We talked a little bit about some public housing seniors who live at Cleveland Avenue apartment indicated that they want to live back in the multifamily phase and they don't want to go into the senior building. Other people who are asked about home ownership who are currently working who says home ownership is a more viable option for them. We want to create as many opportunities for those families to be successful. Is it the same number of senior units as that was originally proposed? The answer to that question is no. I believe originally there was 179 units. Every phase of tax credit application that was submitted that wasn't funded reduced the units. We think 80 units is a manageable number, and it's what we do across the country as part of our portfolio. So the last question that came up was how many units are above 60% of AMI in the senior building? If you saw the site plan, it said 0. But what for tax credit, what it allows us to is to blend rates, and we can go up to 80% of AMI. So we're going to create as many opportunities for folks to move into the housing strategy they feel comfortable with. And thank you for your time. I think that's it.
I really want to thank everyone who came. I've heard some concerns expressed. I don't know if the persons are still here, but we don't necessarily need to have a physical library in the place, but the library they do have a mobile unit, and it's not unreasonable to ask the county to put a satellite library. I think that's something that the planning team can follow up and investigate. That might be doable to have a library in that part of town because there's not one there. The closest one is down at East Winston, the old branch. And I know there was some discussion about having a newer facility down at that end. Someone said keep informed. We'd love to keep you informed of the meetings that we know of. We do need emails. We need phone numbers. That's the best way, the most efficient way. It costs us to mail things, but we're very happy to do whatever we need to do. But I want to encourage the Dublin Drive neighborhood community to organize your neighborhood association. You guys are already close. If you can have a formal association, then it would be easier for us to have a point of contact to get that information out as neighbors. So we can hear your concerns and we can act upon it. I do apologize. I did not notice the change in Brown at that September meeting because the plans that I had seen already always had the senior housing. So it wasn't something that was made widely known to everybody in attendance. You would have had to see the map, the site plan, and then notice it. So, and I do believe that the reason why the neighbors on Dublin were not included in that meeting was because oftentimes people think that the boundaries for a project is just in the immediate area, which is, it's the Northeast Ward, which was 14th Street going towards 25th Street. You are in the East Ward coming on this side of 14th Street. And it just, I believe it was just that kind of thinking that it only affected the Northeast Ward. And I think that's why you were not invited. That's the only thing I can think of as a reason. Because I was just invited to come to the September meeting. Sometimes people think in terms of ward impact, and this is one that crosses wards. So I'm just thinking that was it. But I do wish to encourage everybody to continue to work towards this plan. It is different. I'm not certain if Kevin has told us they can't get money to do the senior thing. But what I will plan to do is I've heard clearly from those who have come out, particularly most of them are in the seniors, that we really need to have a nice seniors complex. I've heard that from this conversation. And we need to think about planning another senior complex. We have a very nice one that Emmanuel Church has done on Barbara Jane. It's very lovely, but it's small. But it doesn't look like a big 3-story complex. It's very lovely. So thank you. First question. The question is that phase 1 that's going to be on Brown will be for part of the residents at Cleveland, plus there's, yes, at least a few. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's going to be stage phase building. Yeah, I think this is a really good chart, and if I can get that presentation, I can get it mailed to you. What happens is the Brown property is not going to be just the residents of Cleveland. It's just 39 units will be from residents at Cleveland. The others will be other folks in the community who want to live over there. And only part of that is income driven. And then there's a whole group, if you can pay to live there, you can come in and pay to live there. And so that's the way it's going to be for all of the phases. The Cleveland people will not just be housed in one development. It's going to be mixed income throughout the entire redevelopment. So, yeah, and it's phases. Once one's done, people will be moved out. That buildings will be destroyed. They'll build a new building. Folks will then move into that. When those folks move out of their old location, those buildings will be demolished and another building will be built. That's why it's a phase build, and it's going to take up to 6 years. I believe it's on the internet now, right? Is this on the internet? No, it will not be in the water bill. No. But I can tell you, I can get you a copy of the presentation. I can make you a copy, but it will not be in that water bill. They're very particular. Well, are there any other questions, concerns for the order? Thank you again for coming out. If you like some suggestions or you like to make more suggestions on what next to do, Ms. Parman and I are very readily available to hear your suggestions.